Life Begins at 40 from Dave and the Dynamos out of New Zealand. There's quite a good story behind this track, and with me now is the Dave of Dave and the Dynamos, Dave Luther. Welcome to Revenge of the 80s Radio, Dave.
Yeah, hi Chris. It's good to be here on your show.
Dave and the Dynamos grew out of a popular project you were involved in, Hogsnort Rupert. Our audiences in Australia and New Zealand know more about that, but for those of us in the States and Europe, how was Hogsnort Rupert conceived?
Well, it started in 1968 in Wellington, New Zealand. My previous musical experience happened in England in the 60s, where I originally come from. And I came to New Zealand in 1966, just to see a bit of the world and a bit of travel. And I met up with four other English guys that were doing the trip out to New Zealand as well. And they were from London, Liverpool, and various places. And we decided to form, we were all playing soccer at the time, so we decided to form a group to play at the soccer club on a Friday evening. And that's how we really started. And one thing led to another, and before we knew it, we were out doing a bit of the cabaret circuit. And our music was a little bit sort of skiffle, which is a bit like American folk music, I guess. And we used the washboard and T-chest bass and various kazoos and harmonicas, instruments like that. And we found that with the New Zealand audience, it kind of caught on, and we became quite popular. So after we went to make a record to send home to our folks in England as a little, hey folks, this is what we're doing in New Zealand. It was just a little demo for them. After HMV, who are now EMI, listened to the tracks, they offered us a contract, which was for 5 years to do some albums, which we duly recorded. They weren't that great, I must say. And so that we kind of shelved there for a little bit. But in 1970, we were back in the studio, and we had a minor hit with a song called Gretel. And then we came out with Pretty Girl, and that was pretty massive for us, really. It was number one for weeks in New Zealand, and I think probably still is the biggest selling single that ever happened in New Zealand for a New Zealand band. So, from then on, we kind of had top 10 hits after that, and then we gave it away for a little while. But it's one of those bands, that we kind of come back in and out, decide we're going to do a little bit here and a bit there. So we'd reformed the band together. And under one of those formations in 1980, we decided to take the show onto the road. And the lineup of the band was the same, but back in the 80s, you had to start doing a little bit more than just playing songs. There was a lot of shows out on the road that were doing entertaining reviews and things, so we needed to go out there and be like them. So the singer of our group at Hogsnort Rupert, Alec Wishart, he used to go off on stage and do costume changes during the show. He'd come on as a rock and roll singer and as a comedian and a country and western singer, those sort of things, bit of comedy. While he was off stage, we performed songs, and we called ourselves Dave and the Dynamos, for want of a better name. Life Begins at 40 came along. I wrote that for Hogsnort Rupert originally and made a demo of it to send to Alec Wishart, the singer. After a few people heard it, they said, why don't you sing it yourself? And I'd never sung one of my own songs before, so I decided to record it, and that went to number one as well. So we're very lucky with that song. So that was the story of Dave and the Dynamos. It was like a group within a group. So whenever we performed with Hogsnort Rupert, we would do a spot during the show of Dave and the Dynamos. So, that was the start of it.
Well, Life Begins at 40 was kind of basically almost a sketch about aging rockers. The song was about aging rockers, but it was part of a sketch.
Well, it was part of the show. All we did was perform songs on stage, and Life Begins at 40 was one of them. There wasn't a lot of comedy going on apart from the song. But in the video that was filmed of the song, of course, they decided the lyrics were kind of made to ham up, which is what we did. We sort of, if you've seen the video, we sort of had a lot of fun recording it, and so we immediately became stars within our own rights, if you like, I suppose. They thought we were a band, and we were often booked as Dave and the Dynamos, and we'd get there and sing two songs. But that's we got by that. So yeah, so even right up to our last performances with Hogsnort Rupert, we did our last tour about 2 years ago. We were still performing Dave and the Dynamos songs. So.
If it works, it works. Dave Luther of Dave and the Dynamos with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Before Dave and the Dynamos, you had the Joe Michat Group, if I had that pronounced correctly.
Yeah. Well, Joe was the cousin of Demis Rousseau. I don't know whether you recall Demis Rousseau, the Greek superstar. He was pretty big in Europe. I'm not so sure whether he, was successful in the USA, but he was very, very, like with Nana Mouskouri and all those European stars, he was pretty big. And in the early days, Demis Rousseau played bass guitar for Joe Michat's group in Greece. And when I was returning from a trip to England on the ship back in 1971, it didn't fly in those days, we went on ships, Joe was performing on the ship with his band. And so we got talking, and I told him I was in the music business in New Zealand. And he said, well, I'm engaged to a New Zealand girl, and I might actually end up living in New Zealand. If I do, I'll sort of catch up with you. So we exchanged addresses and thought, well, that's probably the last we see of Joe. But he did. He knocked on the door one night. There he was, and he was married his New Zealand girl and was now settling in New Zealand. And so we formed a group, and we were resident at a place in Wellington called Burma Motor Lodge. We were there for about 5 years. Completely different sort of music to what I'd played with Hogsnort Rupert or Dave and the Dynamos. It was very continental, very, very much Greek, French. Joe sang a lot of songs in French and Greek and Italian, and it was very successful. He was very successful, but that stopped in 1981 when we went back on the road again with Hogsnort Rupert.
You're not a New Zealander yourself. You're from Britain. What brought you halfway across the world?
Well, it was to see a bit of life, I guess. I played in bands since I was 14. I had my first TV appearance on BBC programme in London called Carol Levis's Junior Discoveries. I was on there with the Dave Luther Skiffle Group and then the Blackjacks, another band. And I played right through the rock and roll era of the early 1960s in Britain. And we were working for an agent just outside London. And he had franchises to maybe 8 or 12 different ballrooms, and we used to appear there and do all the 3 to 4 hour shows while the big bands that were just beginning to make their name would come on and do like the half an hour. So we ended up supporting a lot of artists of the time from Britain, Liverpool bands, the Searchers and Billy J. Kramer, even the Rolling Stones. We did a support for them, and some American stars that were touring around UK at the time. We played with Johnny Tillotson, with Ketty Lester, Delbert McClinton. He was harmonica player for Bruce Chanel at the time. They had a big hit with Hey Baby, so we did a show with them, a couple of shows with them. Also with B. Bumble and the Stingers. They had a big hit throughout the world. So we got to actually play with a lot of bands of the time, and we toured very extensively. And at the end of that group in 63, 64, I was only like 20, 21. I just wanted to see a bit of the world, and New Zealand kind of appealed to me on the other side of the world. So I emigrated out here for a couple of years and ended up staying. So that's a meeting up with the boys from the Hogsnort band. So
Dave Luther is with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Straight ahead, we'll talk more about Dave and the Dynamos and what Dave is doing today. From all the way back in 1970, Hogsnort Rupert with Pretty Girl on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Dave Luther, my guest. He's the Dave and the Dynamos with me right now. He's also the Dave and Hogsnort Rupert. Alec Wishart was the lead singer of the group, as you mentioned in the last segment. From the days of the original Flagon Band, you and Alec have been partners for a long time through some lineup changes and a bunch of huge hits. How did you two hook up?
Well, we were playing soccer in Wellington at the time, and we were playing for different clubs. And the two clubs amalgamated. He was playing for Wellington United, I was playing for Diamond, and we joined together and called ourselves Wellington Diamond United, funnily enough. And so Alec, they sort of had a bit of a gathering one night to get the two clubs together so we could all meet each other. And I've met this guy came over to me, and I'd been asked to take my guitar along so that I could sing a few songs and get the sing-song going. And they introduced me to this guy, Alec, and he had a kazoo sticking out his top pocket. And I sort of looked at it and said, "What's that? Is that a kazoo in your pocket?" Or no. He just pleased to see me. But he had this kazoo there, and I said, "What have you got that for?" And he said, "Oh, they expect me to sing a song." And I said, "Well, what, and play the kazoo and sing? No, just that?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, look, I'll tell you what, I'll play the guitar behind you tonight if you like." And he goes, "Oh." So it was an old Cockney song, because Alec was from London, a Cockney, and so it was an old What a Mouth or something like that, you know. And so we did the song together, and from then on we became friends and played, as I say, in the same team, and we used to play squash together and socialise together. And when the group decided to form a group, of course, it was me and Alec and the rest of the boys. So we were very, very close for 50 years, and I lost my old mate last year. He passed away in January, February last year, so it's very sad. But, yeah, we had a lot of good times together, and we had a lot of success, so, yeah, good memories.
Let's talk about your musical background, Dave. Before Hogsnort Rupert started up, how did you break into the music business?
Well, I was into skiffle when I was about 11 or 12. Now, I don't know whether you're aware of skiffle music, but it is actually an American folk kind of music, and it was, you know, played down in the deep south, I believe, and you kind of made your own instruments. There was a tea-chest bass, which was like a box with a pole and a string on it, and you scraped your mother's washboard, a couple of banjos and a guitar, and you played this very folky sort of music. And it was quite a revolution in Britain at the time, because the pop music in the late 50s consisted mainly of, you know, very staid ballad singers and things like that. Nothing special. Rock and roll hadn't really come along yet. It had happened in America, but not here, in Britain, I should say, in the UK. And so we played this music when I was at school, 12 or 13 years of age, and that transformed into a band called the Blackjacks, and I went on to BBC TV with a show called Carol Evers's Junior Discoveries. That was like a talent show, and from then on it grew. I'm 15 years old. I was in another rock and roll band, and then I played in a group called Daniel Boone and the Renegades, and that was the band that was very successful for us in England, and quite a few of the players went on to do other things. In fact, the singer became quite known in a band called Wishful Thinking, and he also did a lot of tracks with Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin at the time. Jimmy Page was playing guitar on a lot of the sessions, so yeah, they went on to be very successful, and that's when I decided at that stage I would travel a little bit and I came to New Zealand. But I'd always been in bands, and I arrived in Wellington in 1966, and the first Saturday night here we discovered a coffee bar in Wellington called the Chez Paris, which is quite an institution here in Wellington, very, very famous old place. And we went to have a listen to who was on, this sort of artist playing all night, and somebody sort of that I was with, that I'd met on the ship coming out to New Zealand, suggested I sing a song, which I did, and I was offered a residency there for the next 2 years. I played there at the Chez Paris, and it was there that I met some of the other boys from Hogsnort, and that's how we kind of formed. So yeah, it was good to. I've always been in bands right the way from when I was about 13 or 14. Enjoyed music.
Dave Luther with me on Revenge of the 80s Radio. Hogsnort Rupert was like a pop folk band, and much of your career was that kind of music, or maybe an offshoot of that with a little mix of country involved. Dave and the Dynamos took a turn towards modern rock, the new wave sound of the time. Did you want to look into different styles of music while you were with Hogsnort Rupert?
Yes, we did. I've always been of the mind that we carried on recording with Hogsnort Rupert from the 70s right the way through until 2 or 3 years ago. And I was always very, very keen on us changing the sound, still keeping that same sort of fun element about the music, but rather than sitting back on the sort of songs we were writing in the 70s, advance with the time. So when we came into the 80s, remembering that that song was originally, Life Begins at 40 was originally written for Hogsnort Rupert, we were exploring the music of the time, a little bit of the feel of what was going on the time, but also not being careful not to lose the kind of music that a 40-year-old at the time would have danced to when he was a teenager, 18, 19 years of age. So if you listen to Life Begins at 40, we've used a lot of rhythms there. You've got your old Chuck Berry, God bless him, rhythm in there, which was kind of so prevalent in the 60s and 70s, even with the Beatles. You had that sort of chunky chunk rhythm in there. There's a little bit of T-Rex music in there. You've got your Rolling Stones suggestion there. A little bit of the Shadows from Britain. There's lots of music that we've tried to blend into that song so that it was the music that we would dance to when we were 18 if we were then a 40-year-old in 1983. But we still wanted to keep it into the way the 1980s music was going. We used a drum machine on that song and a live drummer, so we used both. A lot of the bands in the 80s had started to move into drum machines and sequence music. Even though the backing of Life Begins at 40 is very simple, there was a little bit of sequencing going on there, a little bit more than what you probably would think. Can't Spell Rhythm was certainly a sequence track with sequence bass, and that's what the bands were doing in the 80s, a lot of them, sequencing their music. And a lot of the music was also a bit punky, so you had that natural English accent, which I had naturally anyway when I sang. So I guess that's why people said when they listened to the song that maybe you should try singing this one yourself and see what happens. And yeah, so you're right. Even right the way through to Hogsnort Rupert's last recordings, I tried to write songs that had a feel more of what was going on at the time. You listen to a track. There's a track called Hypnotic, which we did with Hogsnort in 2000 or something, 2006 or something like that. And it's very much up with the play. A lot of bands these days, they're successful, say in their decade, maybe the 60s or 70s, and then they just keep playing that same sort of music right the way through their career, without trying to actually diversify and change the sort of feel of the music and the actual songs that they're writing. And that's what I've always tried to be a little bit different to that.
And the other good thing about the Life Begins at 40 song was Dave and the Dynamos provided a fine public service to all of their fans and anybody else who listened. Beware of guys who are bigger than 10-ton diggers.
Yeah. Well, that's quite funny, really, because even on the video of that, on the YouTube, the 10-ton digger that throws me out is an ex-All Black. He played for the All Blacks rugby team. But he happened to be the brother-in-law of the bass player in the band, Kevin, who was playing bass in the Dynamos there. And so we kind of asked him nicely and if he would do the part. And at one stage there, I had to say to him, come on, Graham, go gentle. He was manhandling me a bit there. He thought I was a South African rugby player in a scrum or something like that. He was pulling me out and chucking me out. But he was a great guy, and yeah, that was the original 10-ton digger, yeah.
You had Mick Jagger wearing a Jets jersey, which was interesting.
Yeah, I don't actually know who that guy was. He kind of was there on the day, and he seemed to get into it. It's quite funny, really, because you walk into these studios and you know the band members, but a lot of the people that are there, you don't know them. You just kind of make a film, 3-minute film or whatever, and everybody gets into it. It's quite fantastic, really. So even in Can't Spell Rhythm, there's a lot of musicians there that are on stage at one stage or another that are actually in other bands in Wellington, and well-known musicians as well. Some of them wore glasses to disguise themselves, funny Elton John glasses to disguise themselves. So it's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun making those videos.
Both of Dave and the Dynamos' big hits were relatable to the common man. That's what it's all about. Life does. I mean, it really does begin at 40. You can ask me about that. I agree. And we all have trouble spelling rhythm. I mean, we just do, because that word's destroyed many a second-grade spelling test.
Well, it's true, really, because you know, being involved with music in one way or another, whether it be in the retail business or whether you were in the recording studio or you're writing charts or whatever, that word rhythm, I've never seen it spelt so wrong so many times, and I just had to write a song about it. I just had to, and so that was it.
Even the best spellers just have trouble with that one. That's a tough one.
It was really funny because I was writing it down the other day and I missed the H out. And I thought, that doesn't look right. And one of the H's, there's two H's in it. So I looked at it and there it was. I thought, yep, I've spelt it wrong.
I used to spell it with a silent K somewhere in there, and that didn't work out either. For the time, the videos you did for the two songs were rather big productions. The field was coming into its own, and music video channels were starting to spread out all over the world. What was your vision for the band and the videos at the time?
Well, I think the idea of the whole thing was to create a colourful sort of fun spectacle, just to have a bit of fun. After all, you know, the actual subject of the song is a bit of fun, and a lot of people do take it quite seriously. I mean, it's not my saying. Life begins at 40 is as old as the hills. It's an old adage, you know. But when the song came out, a lot of people thought that I was sort of into the psychology of becoming 40. I even had, you know, doctors talking to me about it and things like that. I took it all a little bit serious, I think, the age of 40. And all I tried to do in the video was just to show that it's a bit of fun and it's just a number, really. And everybody, we said, you know, when we do this video, just everybody have a bit of fun and a laugh. That's what it's all about. And I think that we, looking back now, all those years ago, I think we probably achieved that to a certain extent. Just a group of people having some fun around an age. Does it begin at 40? I don't know. I think back, and funnily enough, I was only 38 when we did that video, but I was expected, so I kind of became 40 before I was 40. But I can't remember anything too much happening after the age of 40. But it was good fun.
A bit of foreshadowing from my guest, Dave Luther, right here on Revenge of the 80s Radio. He's the Dave from Dave and the Dynamos. He's also the Dave in Hogsnort Rupert. Looking back, it seemed like there was some momentum with the band, but it didn't last very long, only a couple of years. What happened that caused the Dave and the Dynamos project to dissolve?
It didn't dissolve from the point of view that when we were performing with Hogsnort, which was up to like 2 years ago, we still did Life Begins at 40, and people would immediately know it, and we would say to them, you know, back in the 80s, we did a song under the name of Dave and the Dynamos, going to do it for you now, and you could see the faces in the crowd when they suddenly realised, is that the band that did it? It's this band, with a band within a band sort of thing. So I think it was because we had the project of Hogsnort going that it was very difficult to make another project of Dave and the Dynamos when it was kind of three members of the band and it was all intertwined with the show we were doing back in the 80s when we, as I say, Alec Wishart would be off changing costume. We would then do a song under the name of Dave and the Dynamos. So it was very difficult to get into that project, and you do get a little bit of anti sometimes from people who think that you know that perhaps you're exploiting something and that you know people are going to like it because they're turning 40 or whatever. But that's not what it was all about. And I think when I think back of seeing little children coming up to me at concerts and saying, you know, we love the song, and I thought, well, you don't even know what 40 is, but you like the song because you like the song, and that's good. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to mean that you're going to have a hit with it because people will buy it when they reach 40. Well, wasn't the whole purpose of it. It was just a bit of fun. The song happened to be fairly catchy, and it caught on with all age groups, and I can vouch for that.
Bands and music evolve, but Hogsnort Rupert managed to balance some change with there being a throwback to the 70s era. That was a good mix and likely helped the group continue into the 2000s. What else kept Hogsnort Rupert so strong?
I think it was the personalities within the band. Although we had a few personnel changes over the years, there was always Alec Wishart, myself, Kevin on bass, who was in the Dynamos, Dean Rusko, who played drums for us later on in the 1990, I think he rejoined. He was our original drummer in not the original, but the second drummer in 1970. He joined when he was an 18-year-old. So he'd been with us for ages. And Neil Warboys, who was in a group called the Bulldogs All-Star Good Time Band, along with Kevin, they were very big in New Zealand as well, back in the 70s. He was singing, he joined Hogsnort along with, as I say, with Kevin. And we'd been together for a long time, and we'd seen our children grow up, and we were friends, and getting together to do a tour or to do a weekend of gigs, whatever it was a social thing as well as a music thing. So we could go along, and the kids would all play with each other. I mean, my son played piano in Hogsnort Rupert through the 2000s. Alec Wishart's son Dean played a bit of percussion, played drums when Dean Rusco was unavailable. So they got into the music as well. So it was great to get together. It was a good family outing, and then on top of that we were performing as well. So I think that had a lot to do with it. Very, very hard to break off the friendship of the band as well as giving the band up. So we never ever gave it up. It was always on the back burner. We'd do some tours, we'd do some shows, we might do an album, and then we wouldn't do anything more for maybe a year or two. And then it was time to get back together again and do something. And that's the way it kind of went for those almost 50 years that we were performing.
Today, Dave, you manage Northern Music Works in New Zealand, a music store.
Yeah, we've had this music store now. Kevin Finlater, the bass player, and myself, we opened up Northern Music back in 1979, just as a kind of thing that we wanted to do, and another extension of music. The music was getting exciting then as we approached the 80s. We've talked about that. The music was changing very, very quickly into what it did through I love the 80s decade. I think it's one of the best decades, and I grew up playing music in the 60s, so I did like the 80s. And so being involved with the high tech that was going at the time, with sequencing and with drum machines and synthesizers, was good, as well as having a store and being around musicians and keeping up with all the latest equipment. Over the years, I have to say that the shop has, kind of changed a little bit now. We're kind of more into a family type store where we sell pianos and lots of guitars. Ukuleles are very big at the moment. But the 80s, when we first opened the shop, was a very exciting time for music. And so, it was just a project that we wanted to do and be around music, and I still enjoy it. I still enjoy being in this side of the business as well.
Do you still hit the stage often these days?
Well, we haven't now since Alec passed away in January of last year. We had previously toured for a singer over here called Dame Malvina Major. She was a very well-known opera singer, and she was celebrating her 65th year of the music business. I think it was 65th. I hope I'm not saying too many years there, maybe 50 years. But anyway, whatever it was, she was having this tour, and they kind of asked her, the promoters, what sort of groups or what acts would she like on her show. Well, I guess we were of her era back in the 70s, so she chose us as one of the groups to go and perform on her tour. And we were very honoured, I have to say, because she's a very good, well-known singer in New Zealand. And it was a lovely tour. It was around the North Island, and it was in the summertime, and it was in the vineyards and all open-air shows. And there were other bands on as well, other groups and other artists, and Dame Malvina herself, of course. And we only did about half an hour spot, and we did a couple of songs with Dave the Dynamos, and the rest was Hogsnort Rupert, and it was lovely. Great tour, and that was a couple of years back now. Since then, Alec got a bit sick, and we kind of canned it for a while, and then with him passing away, I haven't really come to grips with it, to be honest with you. And from a music point of view, I don't know whether I'll do anything more or what. Kevin and I had a meeting on the weekend, just happened to get together socially, and we talked about doing some things, possibly with Dave and the Dynamos, and maybe even with Hogsnort, because we still have other singers that used to sing within the band, and the band still sits there waiting. But just at the moment, I just need to cool my heels a little bit after losing my old friend Alex.
When you do hit the stage again, give us a call, give us a holler. We'll definitely be telling all the listeners out there.
I most certainly will. I will do. You never know. Never say never.
No, never. Dave Luther, thank you again for joining us here on Revenge of the 80s Radio.
Thank you, Chris. It's been very, very nice talking to you, and all the best with the radio station. I must say, I did have a listen the other day, and it's great. Sounds really good.
Well,
really
thank you.
Show, so.
I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. I really do appreciate that. Let's play another Dave and the Dynamos track. From 1984, Can't Spell Rhythm on Revenge of the 80s Radio.